Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches a quienes se están conectando al webinar. Estamos haciendo esta actividad en el marco de Hobbit, que es el Día Internacional en contra de la homofobia, lesbofobia, bifobia. Ha ido extendiéndose para incluir también, obviamente, a la transfobia y, por supuesto, incluimos dentro de ello a la lesbofobia. Y es una fecha que muchas personas y redes conmemoramos para levantar las voces en contra de la violencia y la discriminación que experimentamos las personas LGBTIQA a partir de nuestra orientación sexual, identidad de género y características sexuales. Mi nombre es Maggie, yo soy de AWID y voy a estar acompañándoles como su anfitriona. Estamos enfrentando un contexto muy agresivo y regresivo para temas de derechos humanos que amenazan las vidas y la integridad de muchas poblaciones en exclusión. Y este retroceso desde la derecha y desde las fuerzas fascistas coloca una amenaza directa para las vidas y la integridad de las personas trans y no binarias, y su derecho básico a existir está siendo negado. Mientras tanto, algunos elementos, incluso dentro del movimiento feminista, atacan a los derechos de las personas trans y no binarias utilizando lenguaje de derechos humanos. Eh, Obviamente las personas trans y no binarias no son extrañas a la violencia, y una de las estrategias históricas para la sobrevivencia ha sido crear comunidades fuertes de apoyo. Entonces, en el marco de este Data Hobbit, queremos tomar el marco de este 17 de mayo para resaltar algunas de las estrategias que las personas trans y no binarias y sus organizaciones han utilizado en diferentes contextos. Queremos conversar cómo esto está generando movimientos dentro del mundo también del apoyo a los movimientos y al financiamiento, el impacto que está teniendo desde la provisión de servicios y cómo poder tener solidaridad y cerrar filas desde el movimiento feminista también con las organizaciones trans y no binarias. Bueno, y para empezar este webinar, vamos a tener a Shane Bhatla, pronombres ella. Shane, voy a pasarme a inglés ahora. I'd like to introduce Shane Bhatla, who's a non-binary disabled activist and GEDSI consultant. They serve on the advisory boards for Access for Everyone, a global MHPSS QMU project, and ILGA Asia, where they represent disability issues. Shane's advocacy centers on trans and disability rights with a focus on mental well-being. They're also a spoken word poet, writing about politics, queer romance, and mental health. And that is precisely what Shane is going to start us off with, some beautiful poems. Please, Shane. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I hope you are doing well today. My name is Shane, as I was just introduced, and I use he, they pronouns, and I'm very grateful and honored to be here today. I do a little bit of spoken word poetry, not much, but just a little bit. Yeah, you will also recognize my background. Maybe not. Trans kids are never too young to know themselves. This is something that I truly believe in. So let's jump straight into our first poem for today. This poem I actually wrote considering what the political environment of the world is kind of moving towards at the moment. And so it kind of shows my feelings towards it, but also the fact that we can resist in so many different ways and in so many different colors and shades. They say, why you gotta always make things so political? Like my pronouns are a protest, like my presence is a problem. You tolerate, but never truly welcome. But I'm not here to make you comfortable or shrink and shape myself into something more palatable for you. My trans life transcends in importance your cis comfort. Let that sink in. My trans life transcends in importance your cis comfort. Let that ring. Let that sting. And if this truth burns, then maybe you were never ready for these words. If my mere existence is resistance, then why the consistent hate and the persistent ways that you try to erase every inch of me while your ignorance keep you distant from the realities of our subsistence? I'm not special. I'm simply a human that is watching the atrocities of a world that pretends it doesn't see the cries and the silence under rubbles, the genocides live streamed but labeled as complicated. You are accustomed now to scrolling past as if grief is yet another headline. Where do we go from here? We are threatened to be erased with laws, with violence, with God. And with every step marched and every word screamed, the defense you claimed is revealed as murder. And yet, as we mourn, we dare to hold joy. And we dare to be visible. And despite every cell in our bodies guilt-tripping us to continue, we dare to rest. The ones who march before us remind us in hushed whispers to refuse to burn out, just to prove you're still burning. So let me be clear. Rest is not a retreat, and neither it is for the weak. It is a reclamation. So rest, comrades, and let them choke on their own urgencies while you nap, breathe, heal. Use your joy as a weapon and your peace as a protest, and watch them shift in discomfort as they feel a fraction of the pain you swallowed to survive, and call it resistance. So that was my first one. But I also truly believe that resistance in our own existence, as this webinar is aptly named, comes in many layers. And one of those layers is actually appreciating the romance and queer joy that we have in this world. And so I wrote this poem last year. This was around, I think, just before Pride, I think around that time. And it was about someone who I am really into, who is now my partner. And so I'm just really grateful that we're in this space. If chapters of my life were cliches, you'd be my biggest one, but in a good way. You see, only the moon hears me repeating your name while you're away. And only the sun sees my disappointment when I wake and you're not beside me. If orchids cease to exist tomorrow, then you'd be the only shade of blue I'd settle for. Our song was one that said, I'd hold you tighter than a sold-out show. And another said, I'd set you free if that's what you wished. But believe me, that I'd suck the air from my lungs before I stopped taking your name. If our intertwined lives had a label, it would be one that couldn't be described in words. For my love for you, whether we're together or apart, could only be described as my lifeline. So hear this. I don't believe in marriage, but I'd marry you with paper rings. I'd watch every culty documentary with you. I'd try to engrave in my brain every side of the moon we see together. I'd paddle out into every sea and ocean, rough or calm, as long as I'd be paddling to you. I'd jump off every cliff with the condition you were at the bottom, and I'd admire every scar you leave on me. I'd proudly wear you on my sleeve. I'd give up all my vices and every mind-altering substance if it meant I get high on you. I'd present my heart on a silver platter with a knife beside it. I'd kiss you in front of every bigoted family member. I'd drive you to every destination and I'd wait for you for eternity. I'd find you in every life I live, and I would lose you 1,000 times if that's what it took. I would fight anyone, myself included, to make sure you're safe, because at the end of the day, my love, My dedication to you is enough to win every battle thrown at us. For all I want is to take your name as my last breath, to only matter in your gaze. To be able to say, you can compare me with any other love you have seen, but you'll never forget a love as conditional as the one I serve you. Maybe I'm delusional, or maybe, just maybe, this is the most exceptional fairy tale never told. That was my second one. But those are the two I have prepared for you folks today. And I hope it provides you with some comfort that while we do have a lot of things that are happening, we can also find comfort and love and resistance in the love that we share with other people, the joy that we have with other people. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much, Shane. That was so beautiful, so inspiring. Thank you for setting the mood in such a beautiful manner for this webinar. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I could stay here and listen to you for hours. It's been really beautiful, so thank you. And I'd like to invite with us Levan Berianidze to start us off in some of the reflections. Levan is a queer feminist activist from the Republic of Georgia and has a vast experience in LGBTQI and feminist movements in the Eurasia region, which spans over 9 years. They are a graduate of the Social Justice and Human Rights MA program at Arizona State University and the Gender Studies MA program at Central European University. Levan has a vast experience in LGBTQI and feminist movement in the Eurasia region, which spans over 13 years, and currently they are human rights lead at GATE. Welcome, welcome, Levan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Levan, let's talk a little bit about how's the current wave on anti-trans legislation and social hostility manifesting in different parts of the world right now?
Yes, so there are many different manifestations of anti-trans legislation and social hostilities in different parts of the world, and we can categorize them into different categories. And one of the most harshest and brutal versions of that is criminalization of same-sex relationships, especially in those countries which do not have access to legal gender recognition. For the legal purposes, trans people are seen as their sex assigned at birth. So a trans woman dating a man or a trans man dating a woman would still be qualified as a same-sex relationship, and people engaged in those would face legal penalties. And we see that there's this wave of this kind of initiatives, either initiatives to adopt this legislation or initiatives to harshen the existing ones. And they're mostly targeting Africa, especially East Africa. And we saw what happened in Uganda, for example, which has one of the harshest anti-LGBT legislations. And usually these kind of legislations are accompanied with an increase in hate crimes and hate speech and discriminatory acts, because people feel that the government is giving them green light with so much anti-trans rhetoric and narratives and discourses and policies that are being disseminated from the government officials. It feels like it's a green light for people to engage in discriminatory and violent attacks against anyone who is considered to be not abiding by the rules of what is proper behavior for a female or male-bodied person and the gender that is assigned onto those bodies. And for example, in Uganda, which I talked about, we saw that several local as well as international NGOs have been reporting that the police is even engaged in money extortion from communities, because they, in exchange for not pressing charges against them and This is very alarming. Unfortunately, people do not have any institution that is on their side, and the only institutions that they have is, or the organizations and the activists are supporting each other. But this anti-trans rhetoric and social hostility is not only common in countries where criminalization proposals are emerging, they're also happening in countries which have historically had much more accepting, much higher cultural acceptance. For example, our partners in Nepal have been reporting that Nepal is usually has been historically been open to diverse cultural, religious, sexual, gender communities, and the acceptance has been relatively high compared to other parts of the world. But there, because of the global anti-gender narratives that are being imported into the country, they've also seen an increase in hateful attitudes in society, unfortunately. Another manifestation of this phenomena is, which is usually mostly true for the US and the UK, is targeting not the identity, but the expression of these identities. And that would be, for example, targeting drag shows or any cross-dressing, so controlling the attire of what each sex body can look like and cannot look like, and the so-called protecting women's rights, which is usually targeting single-sex spaces, and that is the dressing rooms, toilets, detention and prison centers. And this is true mostly in the Anglophone world. And this is mostly coming from the TERFs, what we usually call as TERFs, so trans exclusionary feminists that are they're ushering this harmful narratives and somehow positioning that trans rights are in somehow opposition with gender equality and women's rights, which is completely untrue, and it's a manufactured moral panic. We also see that there is another manifestation of this, which is ban on gender affirming care and legal gender recognition, or maybe in certain countries which did not have a direct and regulated way for a person to legally recognize their gender, there are explicit bans on those procedures in countries which did not have prescribed policies. And this, in some countries, bans on this usually also translates into access to health and government services, because when people go to access services and when their presentation does not match the gender marker on their IDs, and in most cases, not only government, but even private services require people to present their IDs, for example, opening a bank account or even taking a flight, becomes a huge problem because it invites unnecessary attention, which may translate into ridicule, harassment, even violence, lack of access to the service that people are there to get. And it's basically forcibly outing people. Gender affirming care is also being curtailed. It's being prohibited in certain countries. And in many countries, it's the essential services that trans people need to access. For example, in South Africa, we see that gender affirming care is also curtailed in many different ways. It's not a direct policy, but what we see is that there are many people who are from filing legal complaints against health practitioners who are supporting trans people and accessing gender affirming care. And also some certain health practitioners are being doxxed. Their private information is being published on public domains. In India and in other countries, for example, we see that because of the funding cuts, clinics that are providing gender affirming care as well as HIV services are being curtailed and closed. Patients are being turned away, and marginalized trans communities are hit the hardest. For example, Blue Diamond Society in Nepal has been reporting that their clinic, which was providing HIV services as well as gender affirming care, it was reliant on US funding, and after the funding freeze, their clinic is closing. Another example is, it's not directly linked to trans issues, but it covers trans issues from a different angle, which is criminalization of freedom of expression and assembly. And we see that these new initiatives are mushrooming in different parts of the world, especially in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. For example, Russia, Georgia, the country where I'm from, Hungary, Bulgaria, there are many countries who are criminalizing any positive form of expression on LGBTQI people, which is classified as gay propaganda. And usually people who are engaging in hate speech against gay people, trans people, sexuality and gender identity in general, this is not qualified as propaganda. So basically it's a green light for hate speech and a red light for any positive affirmatory speech. And anyone who engages in any type of positive affirmative discourse or portrayal of queer or trans identities can get into trouble. And this has a chilling effect on civil society, on trans activists and movements. And the most important part, the last manifestation that I would like to talk about, is the shrinking of civic space at large. And there are different manifestations of that. For example, the foreign agent laws that, for example, in Georgia, they adopted this. There are many other initiatives or the laws that are currently being implemented in different parts of the world. There is, in certain countries, for example, in Russia, queer and trans activism is completely criminalized and they're labeled as terrorists. And unfortunately, this is accompanied with global North countries withdrawing from funding. And unfortunately, we see that a lot of organizations that have been dependent on this funding are closing, their services are closing, essential services like mental support, legal support, housing support are just closing down. There is also the lack of data on, for example, when I was talking about increasing hate speech and hate crime, this is mostly coming from anecdotal evidence because activists are on a survival mode. They don't have enough resources to collect the data. And we see that in Europe, for example, the backlash is not as severe for activists because European activists and countries are not as dependent on foreign aid as other parts of the world because of historical colonial structures and everything. But what we see at the social level is that the acceptance and rights of trans people are going backwards. For example, TGU has released this new report, and for the 13 year of its existence, for the first time in 13 years of its history, setbacks in human rights of trans people across Europe, and I'm quoting TGU, across Europe and Central Asia now clearly outweigh progress. The regression signals more than just a crisis for trans communities. It is a broader crisis of democracy and fundamental rights across the region. And I want to highlight that this is not only a trans issue. The trans people and trans issues are used as a wage tool for anti-democratic forces to come to power and then build political systems that benefit only white, cis, rich men, mostly from the global West. And not only trans people are hurt. Next on the line are any other marginalized communities if these people manage to use trans people to get into power and then put up the systems that will harm everyone except for the few. And I have more messages, but I think I'll because over the time I'll try to them at the end during the Q&A session.
Thank you for that overview, Levan. It's very scary and it's very problematic to see how the rights of trans people are being weaponized, and of course the attacks that are directly. I wanted to invite Nana Millers. Nana is an unapologetic rural transgender youth sex worker and feminist with a very strong experience in transgender and gender diverse activism. And I wanted you, Nana, to talk to us a little bit about this impacts for the trans, non-binary, and gender diverse communities in your context in Uganda. And also, let's talk a little bit about what does resistance look like for you on the ground.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And really, I really appreciate the time and the space you've created for me to share this with you. So yesterday, 26 May 2025, actually marked 2 years since our president assented to the Anti-Homosexuality Act in Uganda. And we've been having this law now for 3 years, and it has really, had a lot of negative impacts on trans and gender diverse people and the entire LGBTI community, because what we are seeing is that the Anti-Homosexuality Act, identity, it's not only attacking it, it's saying that they anti-penalize people who are, engaging in same-sexual acts. But then it goes beyond that. It's also criminalizing identity. In the language, it's not, indicated anywhere that it's supposed to criminalize identity and expression. But that's what is happening in Uganda, that I identify as a trans person. I'm not identifying as a homosexual, but then the law says, otherwise. And when they try to interpret it, they weaponize it around identity and expression. And that's why we see that, trans people in Uganda are the most, visible people around the community. So they will be most attacked and targeted. So under this law, we've seen that, it's just not beyond, engaging same-sex acts. It goes beyond that, and it goes to criminalizing expression and arresting trans people for how you look, dress, or speak. And it's so sad. But then also the other thing we've seen that, just talking about rights, talking about, who trans people are, who we are, sharing information on that is now something that can get you punished for 20 years in prison under the Act. So absurd that we still have laws that, criminalize people for speaking their mind, criminalize people for, being who they are. Then something so sad is that we still have the death penalty in if so-called aggravated homosexuality. We failed to find a great definition of what that means. But in their terms, it means that if I'm a repeated offender, I'm likely to face a death penalty. So imagine in these years of equality that we still have a country that criminalizes love, that criminalizes identity, and there is that punishment that can lead you to lose your life. There's that punishment that today I'm here as Nana, tomorrow I'm not there. So it's really sad that we are going through this, but we are also not, giving in. We are not also saying, yeah, it's okay, continue doing. We are resisting. And the other thing is a lot of, trans people, even before the law, have been having, issues with access to healthcare. But then now this just made it worse. I'm a trans person. One, my country doesn't even understand what hormones are. Two, they can't even provide them. Three, even the bare minimum healthcare services that I used to access are now not, out of reach because you're scared, you're going to be outed, you're going to be, called out, regardless of the wind that was there when the Constitutional Court told people that, you shouldn't discriminate anyone based on who they are, they should continue accessing healthcare services. That's not in reality. If me as a trans person, I go to a healthcare provider, what they still have in mind is, no, this is a person who is criminalized. People are not, educated. People are not up to date of what happens later. And then the consequences becomes that when something was already, out, and then people take that we have now a law, we can do everything, we can do mob justice on these people. We finally have the power to, harass these people and no one will, touch us. So for some reason, people now feel like they have the power, they're able to, do state violence and do mob justice and no one will touch them because they are like, we are backed by the state. We are here because you don't exist in our country. The law clearly states that. But then for trans people, it even goes beyond, because even the Anti-Homosexuality Act, we were not, we are not acknowledged as people in the first place. The Penal Code Act doesn't mention anywhere, trans people, doesn't mention anywhere that we exist as a community. And that silence can be an advantage, but also can be a disadvantage. And to us, it has been a disadvantage, because if a country clearly doesn't know you exist, regardless of you saying that you exist, they continue making laws that, don't include you. They continue planning, not including your needs and priorities, and they continue not listening to priorities and issues. So that's what has been happening in Uganda. Trans people can't access hormones. Trans people can't, access basic gender affirming care. In a country that, we have best programs around SRHR, around HIV, but then for trans medication, for transgender affirming care, that's not a thing, because our country believes that I don't exist. So they don't see a need for planning for me. But as I've said, we've really stayed. The other thing is, trans people are also losing jobs. Trans people are also, going into hiding, because as I've said, we are the face of the LGBTI community in Uganda, and it is easy for someone to notice Nana than notice a gay man. But you see how that works, that now if I've been having a job as a trans person and there's this new Anti-Homosexuality Act, my employer will be like, no, I can't continue working with you. You have to go. I can't be criminalized for hiring you. Or, there's a lot that is going on. But also what we've seen over the years, the 2 years, is that there's been an increase in evictions, people are being evicted because the law at some point said that, you can't be housing someone who is falling into that category. And if you are housing them, you're also liable to be punished for 10 years in prison. So landlords in turn started, evicting people, chasing people away, people having nowhere to stay and everything. But then also what we've seen is that there's been a lot of, public outings, especially for trans people, like when they arrest you, instead of, taking you to police and what, they undress you and start recording your body and, start sharing these videos in different WhatsApp groups. And people have been traumatized. People have been, it's been so sad that even thinking about a video of a fellow trans person being shared in said groups where people are making mockery of our bodies, where people are just, saying, oh God, look at this person trying to be something they are not. It's so sad that it's happening in Uganda. But then also what we've seen over the past 2 years is that the collapse of safe spaces and organizing, because many of our organizations have been registered and we've been driven underground, because right now what we have in Uganda, the NGO bureau that, runs CSOs and everything has been integrated into the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And now that means that the state has more control over civil society. And that's what actually we are talking about, Levan, about how shrinking, civic space has become. Now the state has control over who should be registered, who should, operate as a CSO in Uganda. And then when that happens, now what happens to trans organizations? What happens to LGBTI organizations that are not, accepted? So they've been that, and there's a lot of surveillance around LGBTI organizing, trans organizing. So it's not easy now to even register. And those that have been registered, take an example of SMAG, they've been registered. So, and they've been forced to close down. And that is like so sad. But then also to highlight how this is also impacting us, just like we had like 2 weeks ago, we had the Family Violence and Sovereignty Conference in Kenya, our neighbor, and it brought, together anti-rights actors from Africa, USA, and in Eastern Europe. And they were working on a strategy to attack sexual reproductive health rights, criminalize LGBTI rights, and roll back decades of, equality progress. So just know that the anti-gender rights movement are just not, seated every day. They're coming up with something. And when the first conference, when it happened, that's when we saw that we had the Anti-Homosexuality Act passed in Uganda. And now they've been in Kenya. So we know something is underway. There's something they are planning. But one thing I know, we are still standing, we are still organizing, we are thriving, and we'll continue to be here. So how that looks like resistance to us is, one is we've become our own protectors. Like we are our own, we are looking after each other like sisters protector. I know you, you know me. I will be like, Nana, are you okay today? Nana, do you need anything? Nana, are you fine? Don't say yes just to, answer me, but, try and get a great, answer of saying we're taking care of each other in this, in this crisis. So the other is we've also created our own safety nets because, shelters have been raided. So shelters used to be safe spaces for our communities, but they've been, raided, evicted, and trans and gender diverse, groups have also created something that we call crisis centers, that today I'll house you at my place, tomorrow you go stay at someone else's place, so that, we still hold each other regardless of what is happening. Then the other is, what we've done is document human rights violations. We you're claiming that this law is here to save people. This law is here not to make people homosexuals. This law is here to, save your children, but then it's doing more harm than good. This is what is happening on ground. We are seeing an increase in violence. We are seeing an increase in mob attacks. We are seeing increase in evictions. So these have been like a powerful tool for us to advocate against it, because up to now it's still in the Supreme Court, but we hope for the best. We've not heard more about what will happen, but the Supreme Court is like the last resort for Uganda after the council see the damages that this law is doing to our community. But then also what we've been doing recently is building digital resilience. When organizing in person fails, something that we learned during COVID-19 was we can actually rally and mobilize online. So, but also online spaces have been toxic for trans people. Take a look at Twitter. Twitter has been, toxic for trans people. Social media is no longer protecting us. Meta, take a look at Meta. So everything is in chaos. So what we've done is build digital resilience and also ensure that, people have the skills to navigate online spaces. Yes, we are moving to operating to online, but are you aware that actually social media can also be a dangerous sport and environment for you? So we've, invested in digital security, we've encrypted communications, and we've done collective awareness campaigns to protect and support each other. Also, lastly, is despite the crackdowns that are happening, despite what is happening, one thing that has also worked for us is collective organizing. Now we are now speaking like one voice. We are not divided, and that has helped us as a community. We've come up with practice, regardless of who you are. You come and share one message to the government, to the donors, and that is working, because at the end of the day, we don't leave single life issues. Yes, I'm a trans person, but I might also be a sex worker. And I might also be a person who injected forms of no operation that I will go through. But then if we work in silos, we'll never achieve what we want to achieve. So something that has been, greater at this time is collective organizing has actually worked. And under threat and hostile environments, it's something that actually can change and withstand any crises. So in Uganda, resistance is happening. We are resisting. We are not bowing down to their laws. We are not bowing down to any executive orders that are, issued out in the USA, which are having a ripple effect on trans organizing in Uganda. Like recently, when the executive orders started coming in, and I'll give an example on that one around, protecting women from many sports. So the president of Kenya said something interesting and said, we've been waiting for something like this. There is only one man and a woman. There is nothing like in between. There is nothing like intersex. We only know two genders. Imagine what that does to the generation that believes in that president, or what does that mean for law and policy makers in that country. They continue now to bring things that have been, issued in the USA, and then later we'll have a very ripple effect to the community that is in on that we are really going to be here. We are thriving regardless of their laws, regardless of their executive orders, regardless of them pushing us to the margins. We've been here. This is just a drought. I always tell people, and it will come to pass. We will thrive and will come out beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nana, for sharing this powerful experience and, of course, the harsh reality that you're facing, as well as the powerful resistance that you are here and you will thrive. All of our solidarity with you. I'd like to invite now our colleague Shivuli, because one of the elements that we often talk about when we talk about supporting and having solidarity with trans and non-binary and gender diverse organizations is the part on resourcing. And so to talk a bit about that is with us today Shibuli Ukwimi, who's an African trans feminist with over 18 years of dedication to social justice, human rights, and gender equity across the globe. She brings to the conversation a wealth of knowledge shaped by lived experience, deep movement roots, and strategic vision. She has worked extensively in philanthropy, designing and leading responsive initiatives that center the voices and needs of trans, gender diverse, and non-binary communities. Shibuli is based in Lusaka, Zambia, and currently serves as the Deputy Director of the International Trans Fund. So welcome, Shibuli.
Thank you so much, Maggie, and thanks for having me. Apologies for my rustic voice. I'm just recovering from a cold, but so happy to be here. And yeah, a lot of thanks to previous speakers and also to Nana, because I know that people like Nana represent the resilience that we're speaking about. So Maggie, I don't know if you want me to go ahead.
Sure. Yes, I wanted to ask you to talk to us a little bit about what strategies have been effective for resourcing trans, non-binary, and gender diverse activism in these times of such harsh persecution.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And this is a very critical question at this time. I know, as I heard Nana speaking, I know that most of us in January and February, we felt like the world was coming to an end. And to see that now we are heading towards mid-year and we're still here, we're still resilient, we're still surviving. The funding area has been highly impacted. I think philanthropy and funding around trans issues has been highly impacted. I'm sure you will know that for years, I mean, historically, trans movements and the trans work has been chronically underfunded. And when this wave of all these cuts in funding came, it even put trans communities at a greater disadvantage. But maybe I might for those that may not be very familiar with the ITF, maybe I just say a few lines about the ITF. So the International Trans Fund, which is the ITF, is a global participatory grant maker. And we are exclusively dedicated to resourcing trans, non-binary, and trans-diverse communities worldwide. We work to mobilize resources, and we work collectively with communities to ensure that we eliminate funding gaps that exist for trans people. And we envision a world where all trans people are safe, free, and able to live in dignity. Over the last 8 grant cycles, I mean, the ITF has been in existence from 2017, and over the last 8 years or 8 grant cycles, we have managed to disperse about $8 million to 214 trans-led organizations in 99 countries. So we were hugely impacted by the funding cuts that happened in the US, I think at 2 levels. One is directly impacted ourselves, but secondly is majority of our partners were left without funding. And at the ITF, we had 2 options. One, what really made sense was just to cut our budget, right? To cut our grant making budget, because if our budget has been cut, certainly what makes sense is for us to cut our budget as well to our grant partners. I mean, annually we are able to disburse about 35 to 40 grants. So looking at the funding cuts that we were experiencing, we were going to cut that budget to maybe about 20 organizations per year. And the ITF, I mean, in this last cycle, we received 750 applications. So you can imagine, out of the 750 applications, if we were to cut down to only supporting 20. Our second option was to remain bold and resilient in the face of these targeted attacks. And I'm sure your guess is as good as mine. We decided to remain resilient. We chose the latter. We scaled our fundraising. We knocked on every door that we could. And I am proud to say that in a year, 2025, where we have funding challenges, we now have a budget of 2.3 million that will be able to disperse to groups globally. Last year, our budget was 1.5, and last year things were not that bad. And this year, when things are really bad, we now have we are almost doubling our budget. So for us, this is what resilience looks like. And I must say and commend my colleagues within the ITF that we remain to be bold. We didn't take the easy way out, even though the easy way out made a lot of sense. But we said we will not reduce our grant-making budget. In fact, we are going to increase our grant-making budget because communities around the world need funding now more than ever. Maggie, you asked what strategies are we using? Well, first of all, I think this is the heartbeat of the ITF. Community-led grant making for us is a political decision. Our grant making is not a charity strategy. It is a political decision. Our participatory grant making model puts decision-making power into the hands of trans people themselves. So all decisions, all funding decisions are made through our grant-making panel, and our grant-making panel is led by trans activists. We believe that trans activists, especially at this moment, we believe that trans activists across the globe know what is best for us to support. Secondly, it's our flexible funding. And also recently, I mean, in the first 5 years of the ITF, because of limited resources, would only give 1-year grants. But in the last 2 to 3 years, we have moved to multi-year funding. And this has really, really helped organizations because organizations then don't have to have that pressure and anxiety of where their next funding is going to come from. So in times like this, it helps organizations to plan. It helps organizations to be flexible in what they can do. Also, our funding is general support. I think this is what has really worked best for us resourcing movements, because at a time, like when Uganda happened, Nana was speaking to Uganda, when Uganda happened, we wrote to our partners and said, look, we may not currently have a rapid response fund, but you have general support. So you could easily turn that general support into emergency money, fund your priorities, ensure your safety and security, and ensure the needs, and also including your wellness. So our flexible funding helps organizations to pay for safety, rest, healing, visioning, and not just survival. Thirdly, as I mentioned, we always want to ensure that we fund safety and well-being as a priority. This was a challenging conversation in the ITF because when we had conversations and discussions, we said the ITF, we are a small number of staff. Would we be placed to fund a rapid response, to set up a rapid response fund, or even an emergency response fund? Because that can be quite complicated. And we said, well, we have Urgent Action Fund, we have Freedom House, we have all these emergency response mechanisms. And again, we could have taken the easy way out and said, look, this is not our forte. Let us leave it to those that are better placed to do this. But 2 years ago, what we did is we set up an opportunity and crisis fund. And this year, we have also set up a discretionary fund. This is exciting for the ITF because, as I mentioned, we are a participatory grant maker, meaning that all funding decisions are made by our grant making panel. But the challenge that we had is we only have one cycle per year. So what happens when the US situation happens, or when Uganda happens, or when Russia happens? It means that we'd have to wait until October the following year. So I am glad that the board of the ITF approved that we set up an opportunity and crisis fund so that as opportunities and crises emerge, the ITF is able to support these mechanisms. And this is done through a special grants committee that we have. And we moved further. We set up a discretionary or strategic fund when there's an emergency. At least at the directorate level, either the deputy director of the ITF or the director of the ITF is able to approve up to $20,000, because we do imagine that some of these issues will need us to respond maybe within 3 days or 5 days. And we've also ensured that the disbursement mechanism that we use is not the conventional banking, where they'll tell you this takes like 3 or 5 working days. With the system that we're using right now, if we disperse funds now within 12 hours, and in some countries within 6 hours, the funds will be able to reflect in the group's bank accounts. So this is really critical, especially at a time like this. And lastly, I just want to speak about the importance of cross-movement and regional solidarity. I mean, this really matters, and that's why I feel so happy to be speaking on an AWID convened webinar, because this really matters. We've seen very strong results when trans groups build alliances with feminist, disability, and racial justice movements. And regional and local collaborations can also amplify access to funding and also create shared protection mechanisms. The ITF has been very intentional about this. Last year, we became a member of Prospera. I'm sure for those of you who know Prospera, it's a network of women and feminist funds. So it is critical. I think somebody earlier was talking about, trans exclusionary feminism. And as the ITF, we've been deliberate to ensure that we are in these feminist spaces, we are in these women-led movement spaces, and not just sit back and be left behind. So thank you so much. And I'm sure some questions will come up when you open it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. We actually already have some questions on the Q&A. We'll come back to them later. Thank you so much for going the extra mile and never taking the easy way out, as well as being here. Thank you for this very inspiring work that you do. And if you haven't used translation yet, I am going now to Spanish. quiero invitar a Amaranta Gómez, que es antropóloga social egresada de la Universidad Veracruzana, indígena zapoteca y muxe, una identidad de género de la cultura oaxaqueña. Amaranta es activista social desde hace más de 20 años en el ámbito local, regional e internacional en materia de salud, sexualidad, derechos humanos y promoción cultural. Hoy nos acompaña bajo el sombrero de IPPF. Muchísimas gracias por estar por acá, Amaranta. Muy bienvenida, qué alegría que puedas estar.
Maggie, muchas gracias por la oportunidad. He escuchado cuidadosamente a Nana, a Levia y a la última colega, Chibuli. La verdad que han puesto ya lo que se necesita colocar, que son estos escenarios dramáticos que estamos viviendo para nuestras comunidades, y han también colocado los datos, las posiciones y cómo es que de alguna manera dentro de ese escenario hostil pues hay bastantes oportunidades. Y desde IPPF y MexFam, a la organización la cual colaboro ahora mismo, estamos o preferimos pensar en las oportunidades que deberíamos de tener y construir frente a esos escenarios hostiles. Por lo tanto, no voy a repetir los datos, no voy a repetir lo dramático que significa para América Latina que tengamos al vecino del norte, ¿no? Haciendo estos ambientes poco favorables para nuestras comunidades. Pero lo que yo
Justamente,
sí
perdón,
quisiera,
justamente,
sí,
Amaranta, quería pedirte también que nos pudieras hablar un poquitito sobre este tema de los servicios de salud sexual y reproductiva, de cómo es que construimos servicios de salud sexual y reproductiva que sean incluyentes para las personas trans, no binarias y de género diverso, y cuáles son como algunas áreas de mejora, a partir obviamente del expertise que tienen ustedes como organización.
exacto. Yo al final hablaré sobre la experiencia que estamos teniendo desde el Istmo con la comunidad Mushe, como eso a partir de esta organización MexFam, nuestra organización que es filial de IPPF, está creando un modelo para poder eh, replicarlo de alguna manera. Pero creo que poco se ha hablado, Maggie. Hola.
Ya, te escuchamos.
Ok, gracias. Decía yo que una de las cosas que creo que deberíamos de pensar en estos escenarios es cómo construir estas alianzas estratégicas desde diferentes sectores, particularmente desde los feminismos plurales, por supuesto, y auténticos, y por supuesto los movimientos trans y no binarios del mundo. Creo que necesitamos tener un punto de partida para reconocer que mucho de lo que estamos viviendo ahora, Maggie, tiene razones históricas y que tiene que ver con los colonialismos, con los racismos, ¿no? Y justo los clasismos que estamos viviendo ahora mismo. Y en todo caso, lo que nos muestra es que pareciera ser que el otro, la otredad, es fuente de todo mal y eso genera miedo. Y ahí pareciera ser que nos colocan a estos sectores eh, que están en las grandes esferas del círculo rojo del poder, quieren colocarnos o intentan colocarnos en estas periferias. Pero creo que los feminismos nacimos con un don, eh, eh, un don de resiliencia capaz de dolerse sobre la realidad del otro. Y estos transfeminismos y feminismos diversos, plurales, están posibilitando las conexiones y las intersecciones para que veamos nuevos escenarios, explorar otras posibilidades. Cuando ya una puerta se cierra, abrimos dos más. Y creo que ahí hay una parte que en los últimos 20 años, desde de los feminismos dijimos que era súper necesario conectar con el movimiento, conectar con las personas, conectar, pero creo que hemos llegado a un punto en donde ya no es suficiente conectar. Ahora que hablaba la colega del FIT, por ejemplo, yo fui una de las primeras codirectoras del FIT, y yo me acuerdo justo que decíamos, necesitamos conectar, pero el FIT finalmente, y muchas organizaciones como IPPF y MexFam, nos damos cuenta que no basta con conectar. porque finalmente me acerco, pero conozco de manera parcial. Es necesario subir a las comunidades, es necesario que las comunidades hagan parte de las decisiones, porque si no, finalmente simplemente no se van a involucrar. Y creo que ahí hay una gran oportunidad para empezar a construir esa nueva ola de resistencias frente a estos fundamentalismos, a estos colonialismos que nos permitan pues avanzar un poquito más. Am, y creo que la intersección hoy en día cada vez más debería de importarnos. Pensar, por ejemplo, ¿qué tendría hoy en común una chica de Bogotá, trans, una mushe de Juchitán aquí en Oaxaca, alguien isra en la India o una mujer feminista en Haití para luchar juntas? Bueno, lo que tenemos en común en este momento es que vivimos violencias. Eso tenemos en común, por ejemplo, ¿no? Pero al mismo tiempo tenemos fuerzas para poder conjuntar y colaborar contra esas violencias y que podríamos hacer acciones en común. Pienso mucho en esta categoría que se utiliza mucho muy recientemente sobre las crisis fructíferas. Pienso que las crisis hay que convertirlas en esas grandes oportunidades que a nosotras, y eso requiere de mucha creatividad, por supuesto. Y yo creo que tanto el feminismo como el transfeminismo ha bregado mucho en tallerear, por ejemplo, el imaginar cómo queremos hacer esto, cómo queremos hacer lo otro. Y claro, frente a un escenario hostil de la impronta que hay que responder rápido, nos olvidamos de eso. Y yo creo que hay que volver un poquito a eso y mirar estos escenarios y esos otros actores claves que están peleando también los derechos que necesitan ser reconocidos. Para el caso latinoamericano es muy interesante porque si bien es cierto tenemos, por ejemplo, pues el escenario del norte, ¿no? Con los Estados Unidos, pero también en el sur, con Argentina, ¿no? Con todo lo que ha implementado mi ley, con la amenaza de que la ley de identidad de género, que se logró con mucha lucha y mucho compromiso por lideresas como Luana Berkins, a Diana Zacayán y otros, son logros muy importantes, pero que hoy están amenazados, o gobiernos como el de Nicaragua o el de El Salvador, fascistas que pues hacen que los fondos feministas se vayan del país y dejen de alguna manera en la incertidumbre a los movimientos feministas de colegas que han hecho un buen trabajo. Y no solo eso, creo que es un momento para que los movimientos feministas y particularmente nuestros movimientos transfeministas, volteemos los ojos para mirar qué tenemos en común con el campesinado, qué tenemos en común con las personas con discapacidad, qué tenemos en común con las personas migrantes, qué tenemos en común con las personas afros. Muchísimo. Lo que yo creo es que no hemos sido capaces de hacer esa articulación, de esa interseccionalidad colaborativa que yo siempre insisto, en que ya no solamente nuestro movimiento, ya no basta describirle a los estados, gobiernos, cuáles son nuestras características y nuestras múltiples vulnerabilidades. Puede ser mujer y al mismo tiempo migrante y vivir con una discapacidad. Bueno, eso a los estados, gobiernos hay que explicarle por qué va primero. ¿Va el ser mujer a la hora de una situación de violencia? ¿Va el tema de raza o qué va? Y eso tiene una practicidad que Ewi ya ha trabajado muchísimo, eso por supuesto, pero creo que hay que pasar de eso a esa interseccionalidad colaborativa en donde creamos alianzas con movimientos, por ejemplo, medioambientalistas. El cambio climático ya es un tema real para todas y todos y nos va a afectar a todos. Justo IPPF está por sacar un informe sobre qué tiene que ver o qué impacto tiene el cambio climático en la salud sexual reproductiva de las personas, sobre todo de los jóvenes. Próximamente se los podemos compartir. Y ahí justo pensando en una estrategia que nos pueda de alguna manera mirar y dar algún horizonte de cómo atender, bueno, pues desde hace 6 años más o menos, desde MEXFAN, una de las filiales de IPPF, MEXFAN implementó un proyecto que se llama Transformándome. Transformándome está dirigido por personas mushes y para personas mushes. Para quienes no conozcan, mushe es una identidad de género indígena propia de esta cultura zapoteca, similar a otras identidades como las que he mencionado, ¿no? Ishras en la India, Fafafines en la Polinesia, Tu Spirit en Canadá, Berdash en Estados Unidos y otras. Este tipo bueno, y este grupo de alguna manera se ha organizado para poder hablar sobre sus propias necesidades, y creo que una de las cosas que ha hecho muy bien MEXFAM y PPF es facilitar procesos, no sustituir a las comunidades, facilitar procesos, y creo que eso es lo que hacemos las organizaciones civiles para que las comunidades se organicen, decidan qué quieren hacer, qué quieren atender de sus trabajos. Una cosa que tiene esta comunidad es que en los últimos 20 años se ha generado mucho mito en reportajes, en notas, en documentales, ¿no? De que pareciera ser un paraíso la realidad, pero en realidad no existe eso. Y el proyecto Transformándome mostró, por ejemplo, que en los últimos 20 años ha habido 30 asesinatos para las personas mushes. Y eso no se había registrado. Y eso hizo que se generara una relación interinstitucional con, con la justicia, con la Fiscalía Estatal en Oaxaca, y se creó una plataforma de manera conjunta entre la comunidad y la Fiscalía para poder hacer denuncias en líneas y que fuesen atendidas de manera expedita. Y estamos en este proceso de crear ese tipo de modelos que nos permita asegurar en que tanto el Estado como la sociedad sean actores con los que se pueda dialogar. En definitiva, este proyecto lo que busca es la inclusión y la justicia social para las comunidades. Estamos en esa exploración aún, pero son pequeños visos, ¿no? O por ejemplo, uno de los modelos que estamos creando en la región del Istmo es la creación de los consejos municipales para prevenir y eliminar la discriminación, en donde no es exclusivo para la diversidad sexual, sino se sientan ahí actores que también, otros actores, ¿no? Personas con discapacidad, personas de la tercera edad, jóvenes, que toman decisiones y acompañan y asesoran a las autoridades locales para hacer ambientes favorables, para hacer infraestructura, por ejemplo. ¿Qué pasa cuando diseñan, por ejemplo, una obra pública? Bueno, eso le afecta a la salud de las personas si no hay rampas, por ejemplo, para personas con discapacidad. Desde eso hasta pensar qué va a pasar si no hay insumos preventivos para las y los jóvenes, para las personas que puedan ejercer una sexualidad placentera. Y para el caso de las personas trans, por ejemplo, que están, algunas, en el caso de la región, hay pocos casos, pero sí hay, ¿no? Cuando empieza esta feminización o masculinización del cuerpo, pues bueno, se están creando estos modelos de alguna manera que puedan favorecer que las personas tengan especialistas para que puedan ser atendidas con calidad y con calidez. Esas son las cosas que creo que podríamos empezar a pensar en cómo podemos darle una vuelta a esa realidad dramática. Existe, no lo vamos a negar, esa es una realidad. Yo espero que en los próximos 2 años la cosa se vaya acomodando. Sin embargo, creo que la crisis nos está enseñando dos cosas. Uno, movernos del lugar y tratar de que ese movimiento de lugar nos permita aliarnos con otros actores para que la lucha pues no la demos solos, ni solas, ni soles. Necesitamos aliarnos realmente y con compromiso real, con ética, ¿no? Porque pues si no nos van a avasallar, y creo que eso no lo podemos permitir como movimientos sociales.
Muchísimas gracias, Amaranta, como siempre, por la profundidad de tus palabras, por traer el tema de la colonialidad y la racialidad hacia la mesa y por ese llamado a, a que nos unamos, a que colaboremos realmente entre movimientos, más allá de las copresiones individuales. English. So let me go back to English for our closing speaker. Umaira Ahmad, my colleague from AWID. Umaira is a Malaysian feminist with a background in international and regional advocacy and human rights education. At AWID, she works on the Advancing Rights and Universal Justice program related to gender and sexuality at the UN. And prior to joining us, she was a program officer at IRA Asia Pacific, where she supported regional, national, and grassroots organizations in using UN treaty body mechanisms as a tool for state accountability and access to justice. In Malaysia, she works with queer and refugee collectives and supports coordination of various mutual aid initiatives. Thank you so much for being here with us. Welcome, welcome, Myra.
Thanks so much. Honestly, I don't, after our speakers, I think a lot has been covered, but maybe I can start with a bit of a reflection, a book that I read recently. It's called Enemy Feminism, written by a feminist scholar, Sophie Lewis, who traces the anti-trans and anti-sex work movement to the 19th century women's rights and suffragette movements led by middle and upper class white women in the UK. And in this book, it highlights how baked into these ideologies was this enduring obsession with rigid, racialized, and essentialist conceptions of womanhood, specifically white womanhood that needs to be protected and safe. She draws strong parallels between the anti-trans feminists and 2 centuries worth of proudly Anglo-Saxon self-proclaimed feminist participation in colonial efforts to clean up so-called gender transgressions and sex works of communities of non-cisgender indigenous communities in former colonies such as India. I'm highlighting this for several reasons. So I think firstly, it's to say that it might be tempting for a lot of us feminists to wave off exclusionary feminisms as not part of our feminisms, but I think it's really crucial for us to confront the histories and legacies of these feminisms and women's rights movements that were not liberatory, but instead contested a patriarchal constraint on groups of women. I mean, that's why we're here today, right? And secondly, in talking about connecting trans and feminist struggles, I think what's really important for us is to keep on focusing on the interconnectedness of the structures and also the root causes of oppression. And to this end, challenge ourselves in falling to the trap of quite narrow politics and identity politics that serve rather than challenge the patriarchal, colonial, and neoliberal logic. So I'll talk a bit more about the spaces that I work in, specifically in the UN Human Rights Council. The arrival of the kind of anti-trans attacks and narratives there, I think, has received quite a lot of attention thanks to the anti-gender lobby that has comprised of both traditional Christian right organizations as well as feminists that are trans exclusionary. So much like the history of the women's suffragette movement that I talked about earlier in the West, they were quite happy to align with conservative actors in the name of protecting women from racialized men and also sexual deviance. Anti-trans and gender-critical organizations working in the UN adopt the same paternalistic approaches to gender and sexuality. In their view, cis women and girls are inherently vulnerable and in need of state patriarchal protection from trans women through single-sex spaces, and that sex workers need to be safe. So over the past 2 or 3 years, feminist, trans, LGBT sex workers, and also mainstream human rights organizations have tried to mobilize and coordinate to address these attacks, whether it's through UN advocacy with UN actors or state actors to alert them, to debunk these arguments, to make them aware of the kind of weaponization of the human rights framework, and also by just being in the space to occupy official and non-official spaces through open letters calling out for solidarity and also openly challenging a lot of the anti-trans narratives that we are seeing come up. But I think one deep reflection from this work that I have is that the wave of attacks cannot really be challenged effectively unless we are also challenging the institutional structures that are inherent to a lot of these systems that really try to slice up parts of our lives and forces us into categories, and is also so adept in capturing our advocacy demands and co-opting them. I think our lives teaches us that struggles and oppressions are intersectional, like a lot of folks have said earlier. They are connected even though these systems of global governance, whether economic or human rights, has found ways to keep our concerns and ideas separate. It wants us to break down our lives and our bodies into individual pieces and never see the interconnectedness or the whole. I'm like to refer to an article written by Zakaria, a Lebanese activist, in his article on bodily autonomy, on how donor dynamics has also contributed to rigidifying identity-based politics and how it channels stakeholder participation, distributes funding, and also conceives its policies, programming, and beneficiaries. These two realms of global governance and also development values practicality and measurability that is bound to turn the complex intersectional experiences that we have, which are located in a continuum, into categorical labels. As a result, movements are captured and are better at competing with each other rather than being solidarity. We are better at being pragmatic rather than radical, and to think in individual rather than in collective terms. I think there's nowhere else you can see this more, especially in the UN, where states, especially powerful states, are at the center of the system, while civil society, who are already at the margins, can barely get 1.5 minutes to deliver an oral statement. And when we have a funding cut or liquidity crisis that we face now, we are the first to be deprioritized. What's more, for access for organizations from the Global South, trans-led organization, and also, who struggle with visas, documents, and costs. So finally, when civil society gets access, our demands end up being on the terms of the state, to compromises or dilution of our politics in the name of holding the line, rather than encouraging us to think of gender and sexuality more expansively, or to challenge the economic systems and structures that impact our material conditions of women, queer folks, trans folks. Adapting to the system has forced us into silos in the way that we work. I think there's nowhere as now that we've seen the need for deeper and political solidarity than at this moment, where trans folks are being targeted, corporations and the political elites are intensifying the exploitation of people and planet for profit, and where the Israel settler colonial regime is committing a genocide against the Palestinian people without any accountability within these systems. So the real question for many of us working within these institutions is to move beyond words to actions. We have to realize that unlike states that are closing borders, entrenching racist, misogynist, and xenophobic policies, we feminist, queer, and trans organizations have to remain in our commitment to the principle of self-determination that is not subject to any conditions, qualifications, whether it's financial, social, or colonial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omaira. Thank you so much for those words. And yes, the institutionality needs to change. And yes, there's a big call here to challenge the way the status quo and the way that advocacy and activism is organized as a whole. We have a few minutes because, as you might have realized, we all ran over time. And we don't have a lot of time for Q&As, but I do see some questions there, especially for you, Shivuli, for the ITF. Is the Opportunity Fund already available? Already available for application? How can we apply to the Opportunity and Crisis Fund offered by the ITF? I don't know if you want to take those two.
I'll just quickly answer that. Yes, the Opportunity and Crisis Fund has been in existence from 2023. So this is our kind of like third year. And Crisis Fund, and it's showing me that my internet is unstable. I hope you can get me. The best thing that I can do for now, I'm not sure if I'm able to drop my email in the chat. Because normally what you do is you write to a program officer or someone at the ITF, or you can write to info@transfund.org and indicate that you'd like to apply for an Opportunity and Crisis Fund. And the person managing that inbox will forward. What was the other question? Is it how much can someone apply for? Was that the second question?
No, I had, and I'm going to repeat this just in case the connection was a bit iffy. info@transfund.org, and you indicate that you want to apply to the Opportunity Fund. The other The other question was, how can we apply to the Opportunity and Crisis Fund offered by the IPF? So they're very similar, and it's you send an email to info@transfund.org, correct? And you indicate that you are wanting to apply. Yes.
And I can just add, that this runs throughout the year. And
it runs, yes.
And people can apply for up to a maximum of $50,000. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have also a question. Well, we had a question for, okay, it sounds for here. Okay, we have a question for Nana and Levan. Can you comment on the African Family Values convening? Let me see if Nana and Levan are still, yes, here you go. So if you could briefly just share a bit about that, as we're almost over time, but please share about that a little bit. Go ahead, Levan, and then Nana.
Yes, I'll be very brief because unfortunately I have not been following closely this convening, but what was alarming was a presence of so many organizations and so much funding that went into organizing this. And unfortunately, as I know, UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, who has been one of the most openly anti-trans actors within the UN system, has also attended that convening. And it is very problematic because we see that the anti-gender movements and these discourses are not only spreading from one country to another, but they're also infiltrating the institutions, international human rights institutions that we at some point thought were immune to these narratives and actors, but we see that this is happening at that level as well. So the work we need to monitor that too. But the great monitoring resource that you can view is IPAS, which is an NGO. It's a global NGO that monitors anti-gender actors and narratives. They usually have a newsletter, and I would recommend everyone to subscribe to it. We also have our newsletter on our webpage. If you would like to go and subscribe to it, we usually send out updates on what is happening around the world and when it comes to trans and gender diverse issues, but particularly for that conference and for other conferences and other events that our anti-gender movements are planning and organizing. IPAS is the best resource for everyone. And I'm sorry, I haven't followed in detail, so I can't provide any more details about that convening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Levan. Nana, do you want to comment on this convening?
We just say, like, I was also following, but wasn't there, so I have limited information. But all I know about that, it was the second one. The first one happened here in Entebbe, and then the second one happened in Kenya. So it just brings civil society actors that are working towards, anti-gender narratives. And then we saw Sharon's letter there and the husband. So those were like, I think the highlights were like, it was for them to have a charter on how they push their agenda. And they came with the charter in the room already, finalized for people to just know what they are going to do next and how they are going to attack more. But I'll share links with people in the chat in case you want to learn more about it, because if I start talking about it, we can, go all day. But let me just share links so that people can read more about it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nana. We are out of time, but this has been such an inspirational session. I really do hope that, much like orchids, gender diverse, trans, and non-binary people flourish and never cease to exist, and we continue to celebrate the strength and joy of having you in our diversity. We heard about the shrinking civic space, about the many manifestations of violence. We heard about being our own support network and how this is happening in Uganda. Also, how funders like IPPF are showing up and being flexible and being there for folks. We hope more funders hear of this so that they will take the same prompt. We also heard about colonialism, racism, and those intersections, and how we need to go beyond this and collaborate among our movements, and we heard about how we need to change the institutions. Thank you so much for connecting. I would like to now invite you all to continue this conversation in the AWID community. Please join us as members, and we will continue to have conversations. Let me close off a little bit in Spanish as well. Muchísimas gracias a todas las personas que se nos unen desde América Latina. Gracias por estar acá. Únanse como afiliadas, como miembros a AWID, por favor. Es gratuito. Escuchamos un poco sobre cómo se ha ido cogiendo el espacio cívico, cómo nosotros debemos ser también nuestras propias redes de apoyo y cuidarnos, la flexibilidad en el financiamiento, el colonialismo, el racismo, y cómo vamos a hacer una toma de Naciones Unidas para cambiar toda esa institucionalidad. Muchas gracias. Por favor, únansenos como miembros a AWID. Thank you. English again, sorry. This recording will be available in our YouTube channel. So please join us and follow our networks. Thank you so much, GATE, ITF, TIF. Thank you everyone for joining us to do this webinar. It's very important for us to continue building on these alliances. Please share your organizational websites in the chat so that people can follow you. And thank you so much also, Shane, for inspiring us so wonderfully with these poems. Please share also your Instagram. You have a lot of fans, so please share also your Instagram there so folks can follow you. Thank you. It's been a great day, and looking forward to seeing this webinar again to hear your wonderful inputs. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much, Awid, and to everyone. Bye-bye.